Brooding cattle baron waited 6 days at the depot. A wheelchair rolled off the coach. The 6th day I almost didn't go. That's the thing I have to say first before anything else because it matters. I'd been there 5 mornings in a row, hitched the bay mare, driven the buckboard the 11 miles into Culver, stood on that depot platform in my good coat with my hat in my hands like some boy at a schoolhouse dance, and watched 3 coaches come in and empty out, and none of them carried a woman named Dorothea Marsh. 5 days. Wiring back to the agency in St. Louis got me nothing but a boilerplate reply that said the passenger had departed on schedule, which told me nothing, except that something had gone wrong and they weren't going to tell me what. I'd written for a mail-order bride because my foreman, Cleet, told me I needed to. That's the honest truth of it. Not because I was lonely, or not only because of that. Because the Anchor D was 240 sections of prime cattle range and no one to leave it to, and I was 51 years old and had let something calcify inside me so long ago I'd stopped noticing it. Cleet said, "Harlan, you need a woman in that house or you're going to die in it alone and the bank will pick the bones." He wasn't wrong. He usually wasn't, which was why I kept him on. So I wrote the agency, and the agency sent me a portfolio, if you could call it that, a photograph and a 1-page letter. The photograph showed a woman sitting very straight in a chair, looking directly at the camera with an expression you don't often see in those portraits, which is to say she wasn't trying to look pleasant. She just looked like herself. Dark hair, strong jaw, eyes that were doing something more than posing. I studied that photograph for longer than I'm proud to admit. There was something in it that I couldn't name, which is probably why I kept coming back to it. The letter was short. She said her name was Dorothea Marsh, that she was 43 years old, that she had run her father's household accounts in Harrisburg for the past 12 years, and could manage any kind of ledger, that she was not romantic in her expectations but was serious in them, and that any man who wrote to her should understand that she would not pretend to be something she was not, and she expected the same in return. That was about it. No mention of cooking or darning or any of the usual promises. Just, "This is what I can do, this is what I expect, take it or leave it." I wrote back the same day. The agency matched us, we exchanged 2 more letters, and she told me she would come on the 15th. The 15th came, no Dorothea Marsh. The 16th, the 17th. By the 5th day I had started to build a case against myself. The photograph, the letter, I'd read something into them that wasn't there. She'd looked at my letter and my photograph and thought better of it. A woman that direct would do exactly that. Think better of it and simply not come. No explanation given, because what explanation would be adequate? That she'd pictured the man on the other end of those letters and found the picture wanting. That was the most likely thing. On the 6th morning, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before I got up. The house was quiet the way a house only gets quiet when it's been quiet a long time, not just that morning but for years, a silence that had weight to it, that you felt in your chest if you let yourself feel it. I drank my coffee and I looked at that photograph one more time and I thought, one more day. If not today, then it's done and that's that, and at least I tried the thing. The coach from Alamosa came in at 11:15. I was standing at the south end of the platform, hat in my hand. There were 5 or 6 others waiting, a woman with 2 children, a young clerk type with a valise, the depot agent Purvis who always seemed to be there regardless of whether he had business. The coach door opened. A man got off, then a woman with a carpet bag, then another man, then nothing for a moment, and I thought, that's it, she's not on it. And then the driver climbed down from the box and went around to the luggage boot and started pulling out something that took both him and the other man to manage, which turned out to be a chair. Not an ordinary chair. A wheelchair, the kind with the big rear wheels and the smaller ones up front, painted black, the footrests worn smooth. They set it on the platform, and then the driver went back to the coach door and helped a woman down, carefully, with both her hands on his forearms. And when she was clear of the step and they'd settled her into the chair, she straightened her jacket, looked down and smoothed it, and then looked up. I have thought about that moment more times than I can count. She found me immediately. I don't know how I wasn't the only man on the platform, but her eyes went straight to me and stayed there, and I stood there like a post and couldn't move. She was exactly what the photograph had suggested and also nothing like it. The photograph had been still. This woman was not still. Even sitting, there was something in her that was in motion, alert and measuring, and not the least bit uncertain, which was more than I could say for myself. She gave a short nod, like, yes, that's him, good. I crossed the platform to her. My hat was still in my hand, and I remember thinking I should put it on so I had something to do with my hands, and then thinking that was foolish. "Mr. Yount," she said. "Miss Marsh." I stopped a few feet away, not knowing where to put myself. "I'm glad you made it." "Coach broke an axle outside of Trinidad," she said. 6 days waiting for parts and a new wheel. I should have wired ahead, but by the time we had a rider going to the telegraph, it seemed like I'd arrived before the message. Her voice was level and dry and not apologetic, the tone of a person giving you facts. "It doesn't matter," I said, which was not what I'd meant to say. What I'd meant was that I was relieved. What came out was the truth, which was that it didn't matter. None of the waiting mattered now. She looked at me steadily. "I should tell you something before we go any further." "All right." I should have put it in the letters and I didn't, and I'm not sure why I didn't accept that writing it and saying it are different things and I wanted to say it. She put her hands flat on her thighs. "The chair is permanent. I had rheumatic fever 8 years ago and the joints in my legs don't work the way they should anymore. I can stand for short periods and I can walk a few steps if I have something to hold. I can't walk distances. I can't ride. On uneven ground, I need the chair pushed." She met my eyes. "If that changes what you want, tell me now and I'll wait for the northbound and go home. No hard feelings and no judgment, but I won't go further without you knowing." I looked at her for a moment. Behind her, the depot agent Purvis was openly staring. The clerk with the valise had his eyes pointed away with the exaggerated care of a man pretending not to listen. "My foreman's son drove a buckboard most of his life with one arm," I said. "Best driver on the spread." She blinked once quickly. Something shifted in her face, just a flicker of it gone fast. "That's not what I asked," she said. "No," I said, "it's not." I settled my hat on my head and moved around to the back of the chair and gripped the handles. "Does the house suit, do you think, or would you like to see it first and decide after?" There was a pause, long enough that I wondered if I'd said the wrong thing. "I'd like to see the house," she said. I pushed the chair toward the buckboard. "Then let's go see it." That's how it started, but that's not the story. The story is what came after. I want to say I was easy to be around in those first weeks. I wasn't. I had spent 20-some years running the Anchor D with a kind of controlled ferocity that left no room for much else, and that ferocity had gotten into my manner, into the way I moved through rooms, into the silences I kept. Cleet said once that being around me was like being around a horse that had been poorly broken. You couldn't predict what would spook it and you stayed cautious. I thought that was unfair at the time. Looking back, he was generous. Dorothea Marsh settled herself into the house like she'd been measuring it in her mind the whole trip out, and had already decided what to do with it. She didn't ask permission for things. She moved through the ground floor the first afternoon assessing what was there, asking Cleet's wife Nora, who'd been keeping the house 2 days a week, to show her where things were kept. And by supper she had a clear picture of the kitchen, the accounts ledger I kept in the front room, the layout of the yard and which outbuildings she could access in the chair and which she couldn't without help. She didn't comment on the state of the accounts ledger, but the following morning she asked me, very directly, whether she could review it. "Why?" I said. "It came out sharper than I meant." She looked at me with an expression that I would come to recognize, patient, but not tolerant, the look of a woman who has a great deal of experience dealing with difficult men and has decided not to be derailed by their difficulty. "Because You told the agency you needed help with household accounts. I'd like to see what that means in practice before I offer a plan." I pushed the ledger across the table. She spent the better part of that morning going through it, asking me occasional questions in a dry, precise way, what this expenditure was, what the arrangement with the feed supplier was, whether these cattle figures were seasonal or annual. I answered. She wrote notes in a small notebook she produced from somewhere in her skirt pocket. I sat across from her and pretended to read the land survey report I'd been meaning to get to for a month, and what I was actually doing was watching her work. She was fast. She moved through the columns with a finger and a pencil, noting things, and there was something in the quality of her attention that I recognized from good stock handlers. The same total focus on the thing in front of them, no performance of effort, just the work itself. By midday, she had a list of 4 things she wanted to change in how I was recording the quarterly tallies. "You're double counting the calf mortality," she said. "Here and here, it's throwing the end-of-year figure off." I leaned over and looked where she was pointing. She was right. "How long has it been wrong?" she said. 3 years. She made a note. Not "how did you not notice that?" Not "anyone could see this." Just 3 years noted. I don't know exactly why that mattered to me, but it did. What I did know was that the house felt different when she was in it. Not louder, exactly, she was quiet in the way of a person who is used to managing their own company. But the silence had a different quality. It had weight before, it had presence now. I noticed the difference most in the evenings, when I came in from the range and the lamp was lit in the front room, and she was sitting at the table doing something, letters, figures, mending, and the lamp threw a circle of light over her, and the room was warm. I would stop in the doorway for a moment before she looked up, and something happened in my chest that I didn't examine too closely. We were not easy with each other. She was direct to the point of discomfort sometimes, and I was closed in the way of a man who had learned that keeping himself to himself prevented things from going wrong. But there was a quality to our arguments, because we did argue over the accounts, over the winter supply order, once over whether I was being fair to one of the hands I was planning to let go. There was a quality to them that surprised me. She didn't back down. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to get to the right answer, and she expected me to do the same. And if I was being pig-headed, she told me so, plainly, without anger, and waited for me to finish being pig-headed and come around. Usually I came around. The thing I hadn't told her, the thing I hadn't told anyone, because there was no one to tell, was what the ranch had cost me. Not in money. The other kind of cost. I had worked this land for 23 years, built what I had from 140 sections of dry range and a half-collapsed house, and a debt I spent the first 7 years paying off, and in all that time I had driven everything else out. My brother in Kansas had stopped writing. My one friendship, such as it was, with the territorial Marshal Albright, had thinned to a nod and a handshake when our paths crossed. I had a reputation for being hard-dealing and not easy to know, and both of those things were true, and I had chosen them, or I thought I had. What I had not admitted to myself, not clearly, was that I had also chosen to stop expecting anything. Somewhere in the working and the building and the years of it, I had decided without deciding, the way you decide things in the dark without quite knowing that this was all there was going to be. The land and the work and the silence. And you could build a life in that if you were the right kind of stubborn, and I was. But it had done something to me. Something that Cleet saw and that I didn't or wouldn't. I don't know when Dorothea Marsh saw it, probably earlier than I think. It came out on a Sunday in October. I don't know why Sundays were harder. Maybe because the work slowed enough that there was nothing to fill the space with. I had come in at noon and found her in the kitchen, and something about the way she looked up at me, bright, ready, whatever it was she had, made the weight of the morning land on me all at once. I sat down heavily at the table and didn't say anything for a while. She didn't make me talk. She poured a cup of coffee and put it near my hand and went back to what she was doing, which was sorting the winter seed catalog. "I'm not sure what I am," I said. It came out strange and I wished I hadn't said it. She didn't look up from the catalog. What do you mean? Without all of this, I meant the land, the work, the thing I'd spent myself on. If something happened, I'm not sure there's anything left of me that would know what to do. She was quiet for a moment. Then she set the catalog down and looked at me directly. You've been running on empty for a long time, she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was the same level it always was, not soft and not hard. I don't mean the ranch, I mean you. I said nothing. You run it like it's the only thing keeping you upright, she said. That's what it looks like from the outside, the way you talk about it, the way you walk through it. Like you're afraid that if you stop moving through this ground, you'll find out there's nothing else. Something in my chest tightened. That's not a criticism, she said. I'm not saying it to make you feel small. I'm saying it because it's what I see, and I don't pretend not to see things. She paused. And because I think you've been carrying that alone for a very long time and you don't have to anymore. I looked at the coffee cup in my hands, the grain of the table, the corner of the window where the light was coming in thin and cold. What makes you think that? I said. My voice came out rough in a way I hadn't intended. Because you read all my letters twice, she said. I could tell by the questions you asked. You'd gone back over them. A man who doesn't care doesn't do that. I hadn't known that showed. And because the morning I arrived, she said, you came back 6 days in a row to a depot platform in your good coat with your hat in your hands, and no one made you do that. I thought about the morning I'd almost not gone, the kitchen table and the silence and the coffee and the photograph. Almost didn't come the 6th day, I said. I know, she said, but you did. She picked the catalog back up, not making a moment of it, not underlining it. Just, you did, that's the thing that matters, and now we move on. November came in cold and dry, a wind off the high range that cut through anything less than wool. We had 3 days of early snow, not heavy, but enough to make the roads miserable and keep us close to the house. I was used to being alone in a snowbound house. It had never seemed remarkable before. What was remarkable was how different it was not to be. She read. She had brought 4 books from Harrisburg, and she was working through them in the evenings, and sometimes she'd read me a passage, not asking if I wanted to hear it, just reading it aloud as if we were already the kind of household where that was a thing that happened. And we were, I suppose, because I never told her to stop. One of the books was about the Roman legions. She had opinions about the Roman legions that were more detailed than I expected, and she wasn't shy about them. And once she got me talking about a campaign I'd read about myself. Years ago, in a pamphlet someone had left at the county seat. We went back and forth for a better part of an hour before I noticed the fire had died down, and we talked through the dark without lighting the second lamp. In the morning, I thought about that more than I meant to. She was managing the house accounts by then with a thoroughness that made me slightly uncomfortable, which I took as a sign she was doing it right. She had a system, something she'd developed in Harrisburg working her father's books, she said, and she applied it with a methodical patience that I recognized as the same quality I tried to bring to the land. She found 2 other places where I'd been recording things wrong, which she noted without editorializing, and she renegotiated the arrangement with the feed supplier in Culver herself, by letter, and got a better rate than I'd been paying for 6 years. I told her that, and she said, you just had to push back once. They expected you to. I don't like to push back over small amounts. It adds up, she said, and put a figure in front of me that showed how much it added up over 6 years, and I didn't have a response to that. What I had instead was a feeling I couldn't quite name for a few days. Something to do with watching her move through the house, and the work with that competent, unfazed presence, the way she never seemed diminished by the chair or made uncertain by new things, the way she asked questions because she wanted information, and not because she wanted someone to manage her. It took me until midway through the second week of November to recognize what the feeling was. It was the opposite of alone. I hadn't felt it in a long time. Maybe I'd felt it before my wife died, 12 years back, Ruth, who had been sweet and gentle and who I had loved in the way of a younger man, not knowing yet that love was a thing you could also choose with your whole considered mind. That was a different kind. What was happening now was slower and more deliberate, and it had a quality of being earned, which was not something I'd expected. There was an afternoon, maybe the third week of October, a hard blue-sky day with the cold coming, when I came in at noon, and she was at the front window with her chair angled toward it, and the account book closed in her lap, and she was looking out at the East Range with an expression I couldn't read. I'd learned already that she wasn't a woman who wore her thinking on her face, so I didn't ask. I hung up my coat and went to the stove and poured what was left of the morning's coffee. She said without turning from the window, "Who's the boy on the gray horse?" "Which gray?" "The smaller one. He's been working the fence line for the past hour. He's afraid of the horse." I came to the window and looked. She was right, it was young Denny Calvert, one of Cleet's hired boys, and the gray he was on was a half-broke animal we'd put him on by mistake and nobody had corrected it yet. And you could see, even from the house, the rigid set of the boy's shoulders. "That's Denny Calvert," I said, "Cleet's second." "He's going to come off," she said. "Probably." "Why is he on that horse?" "Mix up with the remuda, it should have been caught." She was quiet for a moment. "It should be caught now," she said, "not an accusation, just the fact of it." I went back out and got Denny off the gray and put him on a proper horse and had a word with Cleet about the remuda rotation, and when I came in an hour later, she didn't say anything about it. She had the account book open again. The subject was finished as far as she was concerned, not a victory over me, not a point scored, just a thing that had been wrong and was now right. I kept thinking about that. The way she'd seen the boy from the window without looking for anything to see. The way she said it should be caught now the same way she'd say it's going to rain this afternoon, not judgment, just the correct reading of what was in front of her. She was like that with the hands generally. She didn't try to manage them or make herself liked by them, which was the right instinct because most of them would have resisted being managed by a woman they didn't know yet, and being liked too quickly would have made them think her soft. What she did instead was learn their names quickly, ask each of them one specific question about their work, not a general "how are things" but something particular. "How's that heifer in the south pen? Didn't you tell Cleet the water trough near the eastern gate was low?" And then not follow up in a way that would feel like checking on them. She just asked and listened and remembered, and after a few weeks she had a clearer picture of the daily operation than I'd suspected, and more than once she said something to me about a situation with one of the hands before I'd caught it myself. Cleet noticed. I could tell by the way he talked about her, which was careful and measured, the way he talked about things he was still deciding about. By the second week of November he decided because he stopped being careful and just talked. "She's sharp," he said. I said, "I know." He said, "Where'd you find her?" I said, "The agency in St. Louis." He said, "Well." That was about all he said, but from Cleet that was considerable. The hardest thing between us in those first weeks was not what I'd expected it to be. I'd expected the chair to be the difficult thing. Not for me. I'd found quickly enough that the chair was just a fact, like the weather or the terrain, and you accommodated it and moved on, but I thought she might find the ranch itself difficult. The uneven yard, the paths to the outbuildings, the step up into the barn. Some days it was difficult. Some days the mud was bad and the chair didn't move easily, and she dealt with that the way she dealt with most things, with an efficiency of effort and no complaint. She never asked me to feel bad about the mud. She asked me once whether we could pack the path from the house to the smokehouse with gravel, because the soft ground there was a problem. I had it packed within the week. The hard thing was something else. The hard thing was me. I am not, by nature, a man who asks for help with the things inside him. I don't know many men who are. It is a particular failure of a particular kind of man, the kind who builds something difficult and holds on to it until the holding becomes the only thing he knows how to do. I had held onto the silence and the control and the way of working through days without needing anyone for so long that I didn't have another way to be, and Dorothea's presence in the house kept bumping up against that. Not because she demanded anything, she didn't. But her being there, her particular and intelligent being there, meant that there was someone in the house who saw me, and I was not accustomed to being seen. It came to a head one evening in late October. I had gotten word that afternoon that a land parcel on the southern boundary, 40 sections I had wanted for 3 years, that I'd had a handshake agreement to buy, had been sold out from under me by a man named Holt to a buyer from Denver. The buyer was going to run sheep. Sheep on 40 sections bordering my cattle range. I'd ridden back to the house with my jaw set so tight my teeth ached, and I'd walked through the door and went straight to the back room where I kept the land survey maps and started going through them, trying to find the angle I was missing, the legal or practical move I hadn't thought of. She came to the doorway of the back room and looked at me. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "Land deal fell through." "Which parcel?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. "The southern 40, you wanted that." I had a handshake with Holt. "Handshakes aren't deeds," she said. I looked up from the map. "I know that. Did you put a figure in writing?" "No." "Did you give him an earnest amount?" "No." "Then Holt didn't break anything," she said. "It wasn't unkind, it was just exact. He had a better offer and he took it, that's his right." "I know what his rights are," I said. My voice came out harder than I meant. She didn't back down. She also didn't escalate. She just stood in the doorway and waited. "I'm sorry," I said after a moment. "That was sharp." "Yes," she said, "it was." She came into the room and stopped near the table with the maps. "You're angry and you're taking it out on the person nearest to you, which is me. I've seen it before. I'll tell you what I told the last man who did it. I understand the anger, I don't accept the edge." I looked at her. "You can be angry," she said. "You don't have to manage it for my benefit, but you don't get to be cutting, that's all." I set the map down. "My father lost range the same way," I said. "He had a handshake on 3 sections that would have changed his operation, and the man sold out from under him. It was the beginning of a run of bad years. I watched him not recover from it. I stopped. I swore when I took over the Anchor D that I wouldn't let that happen, that I'd have everything on paper or I wouldn't have it at all." She was quiet, listening. "I didn't get that one on paper," I said. "No," she said, "you didn't. And now there'll be sheep on my southern boundary, and it'll take 2 seasons to know what damage it does." She nodded once. "Not it'll be all right. Not I'm sure it won't be that bad." She knew cattlemen, and she knew what sheep on the boundary meant, and she wasn't going to tell me it was nothing. "What can we do about the boundary line itself?" she said. "Fencing. Is there a right-of-way question?" And just like that we were working the problem. Not consoling me, not managing me. Working the problem. The two of us, leaning over the survey maps in the lamplight, her asking pointed questions and me answering them. And by the end of an hour, we hadn't solved anything but we'd mapped what could be done and what couldn't, and the anger had gone somewhere other than my jaw. When we were done, she said, "Get the next one in writing." "I know," I said. "I know you know," she said. "I'm saying it so you hear yourself say it." I looked at her. She met my eyes steadily. "Get the next one in writing," I said. "Good," she said, and pushed herself toward the door. And that was the end of it. The thing I have to tell you about happened on a night in late November, and I'm going to tell it plain because it doesn't need anything added to it. I had a horse go down in the east paddock, one of my better mares, a chestnut named Salt, who'd been off her feed for a week, and who I'd been watching with a worry I was trying not to show. That evening she went down and wouldn't get up, and I spent 4 hours with her in the cold and the dark. And by the time I came in, it was well past midnight and I was cold in the bones, and the horse was dead, and I felt it in a way I hadn't expected to feel a horse dying. She'd been with me 11 years. There are animals you keep for use and animals that become something else, and Salt had become something else, and I knew that going into the paddock, but I hadn't quite known how much until she was gone. I came in through the back door and stood in the kitchen in the dark without lighting the lamp. The house was quiet. I was cold and I was tired, and something in me felt scraped out in a way that was more than the horse, though the horse was part of it. It was the accumulation of it. Years of it. Losing things, Ruth, the years. The parts of yourself you don't notice going until they're gone, and always being the man who put his head down and kept working, because what else was there to do? I heard the door from the hallway open. She came through in the wheelchair, lamp in one hand, the other working the wheel. She'd heard me come in. The lamplight caught her face. She'd clearly been asleep, her hair loose, her expression awake and already reading the room. She looked at me for a moment. Then she set the lamp on the counter and said, "Sit down, Harlan." I sat. She brought a blanket from the hallway. I don't know how she managed it from the chair, but she did, and she put it around my shoulders without ceremony, just dropped it there and smoothed it once across my back with her hand. Then she put a pot on and stood at the stove to heat water, holding the counter for balance, and I watched her and didn't say anything. "The mare," she said. "Yeah. I'm sorry." 2 words, not "she was just a horse," not "you'll get another," just "I'm sorry." She knew what loss was. She had the measure of it. She made the coffee and she brought it to the table and sat in her chair across from me, and we sat in the lamplight and the quiet for a while. At some point, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything when she did it. She just left it there, warm and steady, and I looked at her hand on mine, and I thought about the depot platform and the 6 mornings and the almost not coming, and something that had been held very tight in my chest for a very long time, since Ruth, maybe, or before Ruth, maybe since I was a younger man who decided the only thing he could afford to depend on was the ground under his feet. Something loosened. I turned my hand over and held hers. She didn't make anything of it. She didn't look triumphant or moved or anything except settled. Like it was exactly what it was, 2 people at a kitchen table in the middle of the night, and one of them had hold of the other. "I wasn't going to come back the 6th morning," I said. "I hadn't meant to say it." "I know," she said. "You told me." "I meant I'd given up, not on you arriving, on the whole thing, on there being a point to it." She looked at me steadily. "When the coach came in and you were on it," I said, I felt." I stopped. "You don't have to explain it," she said. "I want to. I hadn't known that was true until I said it. I want to tell you what it felt like to watch you roll off that coach and look straight at me. What it felt like to stand there on that platform and know you'd come 6 days late and you'd come anyway. And then you told me what you told me about the chair, and you looked at me like you were just telling me facts, which is what you were doing, and Harlan. And I thought, this woman is more herself than anyone I've met in 20 years, and she came anyway." She was quiet for a moment. Her hand was still in mine. "I almost didn't," she said. It was very quiet when she said it. I looked at her. "When the axle broke," she said. 6 days in Trinidad in a hotel room that wasn't accessible in the way they told me it would be, navigating the chair on uneven floorboards, eating meals that were brought up to me because the dining room had 3 steps up to the door. After 3 days of that, I thought, this is what it's going to be. Trying to go somewhere and finding out at every stage that it's harder than they told you, and you improvise because that's what you do, but it's exhausting and it doesn't stop. And I thought, the man I'm going to meet has never seen me manage any of this. He has a photograph and 3 letters. He doesn't know what this actually looks like." "I know what it looks like now," I said. "You've seen the good version," she said. Nora helps and the ground floor is even and the path to the barn is packed. You haven't seen. Dorothea. She stopped. I've run this ranch for 23 years, I said. I know what it costs to build something from hard ground. I know what it looks like when a person doesn't have the luxury of quitting. And I know the difference between someone performing that and someone who actually has it. I paused. You actually have it. I knew that from the photograph. I know it now. She looked at me for a long moment. Her thumb moved once across the back of my hand. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? An older, harder version of the men who look at the chair first. She glanced down. They always look at the chair first. You looked at my face. I thought back to the platform. She was right. I hadn't looked at the chair. I'd been too busy watching her eyes. I looked at your face in the photograph, I said. I'd been looking at your face for 2 weeks. By the time the chair came off the coach, I was already past looking. Something happened in her expression. It wasn't a smile exactly. She wasn't a woman who performed emotion, but something softened, shifted, and she reached up with her free hand and touched the side of my face briefly, just her fingers against my jaw, the same way she'd put the blanket on my shoulders without ceremony, just placing her hand where it was needed. Get some sleep, she said. The horses need feeding in the morning whether you're sad or not. I almost smiled. I wasn't sure what it looked like on my face, not being used to it. She seemed to recognize it for what it was. Was that funny? She said, and there was a dryness in it that was as close as she got to a joke. Funniest thing anyone said to me in 10 years, I said. She made a small sound that might have been a laugh and let go of my hand and moved toward the hallway. At the door she stopped. For what it's worth, she said. She didn't turn around. I've been thinking about the accounting system your father started in this ledger. The categories he used don't match how the ranch actually runs anymore. I'd like to rebuild it from scratch. All right. It'll take about a week. Take whatever you need. She went back down the hallway. I sat at the table for a while longer. The lamp was still going, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the wind had gotten up, and I could hear it moving against the eaves. I thought, 43 years old and she came 6 days late with a broken axle, and a hotel with 3 steps to the dining room, and she came anyway. She sat across from a near stranger on a depot platform and told him the facts about her chair and offered him the chance to walk away. And when he didn't, she took the measure of the house and the books and the work and found places where things were wrong and started fixing them. And on a bad night she came through the dark and put a blanket around him and held his hand at a kitchen table without making it sentimental, because that was who she was, and it was what was needed, and she was never going to pretend not to see what was needed. I got up and blew out the lamp and went to bed. The rest of that winter I'll tell you faster, not because it wasn't important, but because it was quiet in the way that good things usually are. The drama was over. What followed was something harder to describe, the ordinary life of 2 people learning to be in the same house with each other, which is one of the most complicated undertakings there is and also one of the most absorbing ones, if you let it be. I should tell you about one thing from that December before the wedding. A small thing, but I've thought about it often enough that it belongs here. There was a morning when the temperature had dropped to something brutal overnight, and I came in before breakfast to find her at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup and her chair pulled close to the stove. She'd been up before me, unusual, and she'd made the coffee, and she was sitting in the cold kitchen with her hands around the cup, looking at nothing in particular. I stopped in the doorway. She looked up. She didn't say anything, just moved her gaze back to the middle distance. I poured a cup and pulled a chair close to the stove and sat down near her, not next to her, but close enough that we were in the same small circle of warmth from it. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't know yet whether something was wrong, and asking would have been presuming. After a while she said, "I dream about walking sometimes." I didn't say anything. Not often, she said. Just sometimes. I wake up and for a few seconds I don't remember and then I do. She paused. 8 years and I still have those seconds. The stove ticked. Outside, the frost on the window had made the early light strange, bluish. That's a hard way to wake up, I said. It is, she said, but then I'm awake. She turned the cup in her hands. I've never told anyone that before. Why not? Because most people want to say something useful about it, and there's nothing useful to say. She glanced at me sideways. You're not going to say something useful about it. No, I said, I wasn't planning to. The corner of her mouth moved, that small thing. We sat there until the kitchen warmed up and the frost on the window started to thin, and then she set down the cup and said, "Is there bacon left?" And that was that. But I remembered it. I have remembered it for 22 years, that blue-lit morning and her hands around the cup and the thing she'd never told anyone. She'd told me. She'd decided I was the kind of man she could tell, and she'd been right. And I think in that moment I understood for the first time what it meant that she'd come 6 days late on a broken coach and gotten off at Culver Depot and looked straight at me. She rebuilt the accounting system. It took 9 days, not a week, and at the end of it the ledgers were cleaner than they had been since my father kept them, which she informed me of in a way that was not quite smug. I told her my father had been better with cattle than with numbers, and she told me that was not a compliment to the cattle, which was the kind of thing she sometimes said that I kept turning over in my mind for the rest of the day. We married in December. No ceremony to speak of. The circuit preacher came through. We stood in the front room. Cleet and Nora were there. The preacher said the words. We said ours. She wore the dark green dress she'd arrived in, and she looked directly at me the whole time, which seemed right. I wasn't a man who went in for ceremony, and she wasn't a woman who needed it. What we needed was the fact of it, and now we had the fact of it. There was a moment afterward, after Cleet and Nora had gone and the preacher had ridden out, when we were alone in the front room, and the late afternoon light was coming in gray and thin through the window. I was standing by the fireplace. She had the chair stopped in the middle of the room and was looking at me with that level look of hers, and the question was in the air between us. Now what? Not anxious, just honest. Well, I said. Well, she said. Supper. I believe Nora left something. Then we'd better see what it is. She started toward the kitchen, and I came around to take the handles of the chair, and she let me. The first few days she'd been careful about that, careful that I wasn't doing it out of some notion she couldn't manage, careful that I understood she managed fine. And I did understand that. But there was a difference between managing alone, because you had to, and having someone there to help because they wanted to, and she'd been alone long enough to know what that difference felt like. So she let me take the handles, and I pushed the chair into the kitchen, and we ate Nora's stew in the lamplight, and outside the wind was up again, but it was cold outside and warm in here, and that was enough. That was more than enough. I am 73 years old now, telling you this. Dorothea is 65. She has more white in her hair than dark, and she's been adding a slight curve to the left when she pushes herself in the chair, which she refuses to acknowledge, and which I've stopped trying to get her to address because I've known her long enough to know that she'll address it when she's ready and not before. She still manages the accounts. She added a second ledger 4 years in when the operation grew, and she designed the whole system herself, and it has never once been wrong. The Anchor D is 310 sections now. I added the North Range in the second year after we married because the Barnes family was selling and it was too good to leave. Dorothea said buy it. She'd looked at the figures and said buy it before I'd finished showing her the survey. I bought it. Cleet is gone, 9 years this past spring. I miss him the way you miss a man who knew you before you were any good and stayed on anyway. His son runs the West Range now, and the hand I'd been going to let go that November, the one Dorothea argued me out of, the first real argument we had, he's my foreman now and he's the best I've ever had, And every time I look at him working, I think about that argument, and I think, she was right then too. There was a day, maybe 3 years ago, when I was doing something I probably shouldn't have been doing, which was trying to repair a section of fence up on the North Ridge by myself with my back the way it's been. I told Dorothea I was riding out to check the line, which was true. I just hadn't mentioned the checking was going to involve an hour of work on a fence rail in the cold. I was up there on the ridge, cursing under my breath at a post that had frozen into the ground at a bad angle, when I heard wheels on the track below me and looked down and saw the two-wheeled cart we'd had made for her 6 years ago, lighter than a buckboard, low enough for her to manage with help, with good wide wheels for the rough track. Cleet's son Vern was driving. She was beside him in the seat with her arms folded against the cold and her hat on against the wind, and she was looking up at the ridge. I could tell from the angle of her head that she'd spotted me. They came up as far as the track would take them, and Vern helped her down into the chair, and she pushed herself partway up the slope to a flat spot where she could see the fence line and me and all of it. She sat and watched me work for a while without saying anything. I knew she was there and I didn't stop, and after a while she said, "The bottom rail is the problem. The post is fine." I looked at the post. She was right. I pulled the bottom rail and reset it, and the post seated itself correctly in about 4 minutes, which would have saved me 40 minutes of wrestling if I'd seen it earlier. I picked up my tools and walked down to where she was. "Thank you," I said. "I could see it from here," she said. Not, "Why didn't you ask?" Not, "I told you your back couldn't handle this." Just, "I could see it from here." "How'd you know I was up here?" I said. "Vern saw you ride north," she said, "and you took the fence pliers." I looked at her. "You always take the fence pliers when you're planning to do more than look," she said. I didn't know she'd noticed that. 20 years, she said, and there was something in her voice that was amused and dry, and also something else, something underneath the dry. I noticed things. Vern helped her back into the cart and we went down off the ridge, and she didn't say anything else about it and I didn't either, but that evening, coming in from the barn in the early dark, I stopped in the doorway the way I do and she looked up from the table. That look. Yes, that's him, good. And I thought, 22 years of that look, and it still does the same thing to me it did on the depot platform. Maybe more. Because now I know what it costs her to give it, and I know what it costs me to deserve it, and both of those costs seem exactly right. There is a thing that happens when you have spent a long time being the man who does not need anyone, and then you find out that you do, that you always did, and the not needing was a story you told yourself because the alternative was admitting it, and admitting it when there was no one there to admit it to was just cruelty without purpose. When you find out you were wrong about that, about the not needing, there is a kind of grief in it as well as something else. Grief for the years before. For the man you were in that quiet house with the lamp in one room and the silence in all the others. I don't spend much time there. Dorothea doesn't allow much time for it, not because she's impatient with the past, but because she's interested in the present, which is one of the qualities I have spent 22 years admiring in her. She is interested in what's in front of her. She has always been interested in what's in front of her. What was in front of her, on that depot platform, was a closed-off cattle baron with his hat in his hands who'd come back 6 mornings in a row in his good coat, and she decided he was worth the trouble. She has never said so in those words. She wouldn't. She's not that kind of woman. But she said it in every other way there is, in the ledgers she rebuilt, and the arguments she won, and the hand she put over mine at the kitchen table in the dark, and in 32 years of mornings, the breakfast put near my hand before I knew I needed it, the question asked in that level voice when she's already read the answer in my face, the moment in the doorway when I come in from the range and she looks up and there it is, that same look she gave me on the platform. Yes, that's him, good. That look. I have not gotten tired of that look in 22 years, and I don't expect to. Outside the Anchor D, the plane runs east for 11 miles before it hits the first ridge, and in the late afternoon light it turns a color there's no name for, somewhere between gold and gray, the color of dry grass in October. I look at it most evenings. I've looked at it for 50 years. But for the last 22 I've looked at it with her in the room behind me, and the lamp lit, and the sound of her in the house, the wheels on the floorboards, the slight drag of her voice when she's working a problem, the way she reads aloud without asking. And that is what the plane looks like to me now. Not a place I'd be alone in. A place I'd be coming home from.